Thank you. Hello, everybody. Super excited to be here after, I think it's been a month or 3 weeks ago that we did the first Strapi V5 committee, and this is the second one. And I hope more are coming in the coming month, of course. So this is the agenda for today. I will talk a bit more about the context. I know some of you already got it last time, but I think there's some new members in this call, so I will do a quick reminder. We will talk about the timeline that's been updated, and we will have Lucas who will present content history, which is a new feature that will be part of V5, even if it won't be a free feature. But I think it's important for us to be 100% transparent about what we are doing and what V5 is enabling. So for the introduction, again, I'm repeating what has been shared last time, but we are creating this space to being more transparent with the community members, and want to avoid what happened with V4. So we want to engage earlier on the V5 to make sure V5 is a success. And you will see that we are trying to make the best decision to make V5 a success. Of course, you will get access to all the alpha, the betas, and all your feedback will be captured. And we'll try to fix as much issue as possible once the alphas are available, and especially the betas. And it's important for us that we share all those information with you, because then you will be the advocates, the people who will know what V5, how V5 has been built. And it's important to make sure that this knowledge is shared, especially the decisions and what's going on about V5. Some context, one slide instead of 5 last time. We're working on V5 to introduce some breaking changes. The goal also for us is to match some industry standards. That's why we are converting and migrating all the code base on TypeScript. And we also want to offer a better migration story. We got some learnings from V3 to V4. V5, the scope is much smaller. We really want to make the migration process easier, and also to engage more with you. The scope of V5 right now, we are working on converting a vast majority of the code base on TypeScript, and we also plan to work and to fix 30 major issues. Those issues are often the ones who required a breaking change in terms of behaviors, or how the API is working, or even how the database is structured. It will include 2 new features: draft and publish, free feature, and content history is going to be a paid feature. We will also support Vite as a new bundling system, and the content API will be refined, so it will be simpler. We'll remove all those attributes. We heard you on this. Of course, there are other things, but they will be part of the RFC section. I don't know if the engineering team want to again share or tell more about the RF. They have not been commented enough. Alex, Josh, anyone?
Nothing new on that side. We don't have new messages there either, so pretty stable for now.
Okay. The timeline, it has been updated. So we made the decision last month, so like at the beginning of this month, to delay the stable. So we are still aiming to release a release candidate in early March 1st, but it could be 1 or 2 weeks after this date. And the goal is then to really focus on quality, to let enough time to the ecosystem, the plugin authors, to migrate on V5, and also to let us enough time to capture the feedback, run more tests, even migrate our own website, strapi.com, on V5, and apply fixes and fix bugs. So that's why V5 stable is certainly planned in Q2, mid or late May. But we will still all be able to play with V5 in March. However, yeah, I think it's better for the project and better for V5 to be delayed, stable to be delayed in May. Maybe we can start having a few questions to make this more interactive. So if some of you have some questions, or if Derek want to filter them before we dive into the demo.
Yeah. You go ahead and ask your question.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Will this also mean that the contribution freeze will be longer because you guys pushed off stable?
I think that one's for you, Alex. I don't know if we're still keeping the contribution freeze or if that was just until January.
I'm not sure, honestly. I can't really answer now. It kind of depends of the the status. I think we maybe will be in a situation where we can start opening V4 contributions, but it's not gonna be like the top priorities. But if we have community members helping us fix V5 stability issues during the release candidate, would be great. So I think we try to focus having the community helping us making the V5 more stable. So we probably unfreeze to focus on helping V5 being finished cleanly.
I think we'll probably also have to talk about, and I'll add it as an action item for us to do internally too, but V4 and V5 code bases might diverge after like RC or stable. So we're gonna have to figure out if a bug fix applies to both or not. Yandex, if you want to go ahead and ask. Otherwise I can speak for you. Up to you.
Actually, Derek, you narrate my question.
Okay. Do you know what we need? Schema for content types. I don't like using the CLI or the GUI to extend schema instead. If the content JSON had the same schema inside, it would be easier for me to modify the file directly, like in Lerna. Not sure if I understand the context there.
The JSON in the learner, when you initialize the learner, it generates learner.json file, and it allows you to autocomplete the JSON. So my proposal is, so using CLI is too long and I find it a bit complicated. UI is simple, but you have to run the development environment, which I'm lazy of. So if in the JSON, I think you can have a types or schema for the auto completion. So maybe we could have include inside the content types, maybe we could point to the schema so people like me have auto completion, so it would be easier for them to like fill autocomplete and edit stuff, if it makes sense.
Yeah, we've thought of it at some point, trying to generate a JSON schema based on our TypeScript typings, so that we could have the like $schema in the JSON files. That's probably something we can add later on. It's not like a breaking change or anything, so that could be a nice to have for later.
Yeah.
Question.
Maybe less of a question, but more of a concern. One of the things that I saw, because we've got a rather large Strapi application with, I can't remember how many collection types we have, but there's something like close to 100, where we're doing kind of like an internal ERP type of system inside of Strapi, which Strapi has been amazing to build inside of that. The problem that we run across is with stale data. When records are deleted, and I think I brought this up in the Discord chat a while back, and I'm not sure we got like a really clear answer, but that got worse with V4 just simply because of the database changes that had to be made, kind of suddenly doing joins and all that kind of stuff. We had these like intermediate tables, right? And now we're dealing with, it sounds like we're going to bring in content versioning and that kind of stuff. I imagine there's even further expansion of that, because now every time a record is changed, it's really just a new record. So I can only imagine that this growth is going to get even more extensive, and the problem of stale data is going to be a real issue. Like, for example, I've got a lot of relationships with my data where I've got products, and products have testing results, and those testing results have, so it kind of goes down the chain. When I delete a product, the related data, I don't really have a way to, in the current system, to specify how I want relation or related data to be handled. In a typical database application, that's where you would set up your like cascade deletes and that kind of stuff, right? But Strapi doesn't really provide any real mechanism for us to do that. And my worry is that with V5, again, with us going into sort of content versioning and some of these other pieces, that's going to get pretty crazy really fast, with just old data. Is that something you guys are thinking about? Is there kind of a mechanism that you're considering to kind of handle that going forward? It sounds like Strapi would be well positioned to do that.
Yeah, so we kind of have two. What we have identified is we kind of have two different models or like layers. We got the lower DB kind of level models where you would have basic cascading, those kind of things. Right now, we don't really expose any way to configure cascading on them. And then you have the content types bringing all the like higher level features, I18N, draft and publish, content history. And we necessarily need to have those content types based on that model layer. Right now, the distinction isn't clear, but we have identified with V5 adding even more dimensions, even more complexity, that we still need that model layer to be usable somehow. So that's for sure something we identified. It's just going to be a matter of like what is necessary to provide isn't completely clear yet, and we'll figure it out along the way, honestly, with the community, I think.
Couple of controls for some advanced DB configs, but configurable cascade delete, I think, is one we'll have to talk about more internally because it is becoming more prevalent. And we actually recently identified a bug in DTS where you delete the parent, the nested component data isn't actually deleted. So when we were running DTS transfers, it was trying to transfer the components, but their actual related links to the parent didn't exist anymore. So
Yeah.
getting foreign key constraints. But I raised it with the DX squad last week, so
Okay.
I think that'll probably still be a topic of conversation.
Yeah, even just identifying stale content would be a step in the right direction. You know, if there was a way to kind of trigger or alert, you know, hey, here's content that, you know, is supposed to have a relationship. And I guess that leads me to another question, which is in V5, do we have any mechanism in the API or in the schema to require a relationship? Because that's going to be part of this puzzle, right? You know, one of the things that I really struggle with, half of my custom controllers or custom services are built around requiring relationships, you know, because you can't create a product unless it has a manufacturer or whatever the case is, right? So is there any mechanism in V5 that enables that?
Yeah, we want to make required relations. My question for you is, do you expect that to translate into database constraints? Because from a Strapi standpoint, and considering the complexity of relations with I18 and draft and publish, you mentioned content history, all of those, DB constraints is where we get very quickly stuck. So it kind of depends what's going to be your expectations there.
Yeah, I don't mind that being handled personally, kind of at the software layer, at the API layer, you know, where we would, you know, if you're creating content, it first checks the schema. Actually, but I've considered even like making a plugin for this because it's not terribly difficult. The schema already supports kind of like a required flag. You can put it on there and it'll even show. There's just not right now any logic that's really taking care of rejecting a request based on that data not being there. You know, if it's a relationship, it's just kind of ignoring the extra data or metadata that would be in that schema. So having that supported, you know, kind of first class on the API side, I think would solve my particular need, you know, because then that would let me not only my biggest concern, and maybe I look at some of this differently, I like the infrastructure as code. Like, I'm religiously involved in that. I'm a huge fan of that whole concept. So anywhere that I can have my schema defined, you know, in that very simple to understand schema JSON, I would like to do. I really hate when I have to go and build something that should be in schema, you know, in a custom controller somewhere and sort, because it's hard to audit. You know, it's hard to get a really good feel for kind of what's required.
Yeah, just adding to it, we looked at doing it in V4, and I think our biggest constraint from kind of like a user point of view in the admin was if you had like a one-to-one relation. If you deleted, if you remove the relation from one side, you've effectively broken a content type. But
Exactly.
because there's no concept of, if you publish something, you couldn't bring it back to a draft. There wasn't the ability to have them existing at the same time. So from a product perspective, what you ended up doing was breaking an API potentially completely for a content type. But I think now that we've got a draft and publish system, that we can probably look at having kind of like these intermittent states perhaps, which is something, again, we discussed a few months ago. And we kind of said that it's something we wanted to explore in V5 because we had more of an ability to do it.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's what I was saying. When I kind of brought it up, I was mentioning that there's a link, you know, between that and kind of how you would handle, I call it stale data, but you know, how you would handle kind of deleting, you know, a one-to-one or you know, even a one-to-many, you know, kind of relationship. How do you handle that back to the root?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I'm gonna pause like the Q&A session for now, and we will like get back to all the questions. Thank you, Bobby and Josh and Alex for the interesting discussion. I will let Lucas, I think, present the content history of your like real quick, and then we can go back to the Q&A. Thank you. Lucas, the floor is yours. I will let you share your screen. Or you don't even need to.
Yeah, I can ask you to skip the slide. Do you hear me well? Okay, perfect. So yeah, the story is a feature we are building right now. So let's say it's like 90% design, and we are currently in the technical exploration. Just quickly to explain you why we are building it is really for obvious reasons, like track the history of the contents, avoid the data loss, give more autonomy to the content managers, and make the collaboration more easier between the content managers. But the truth is that if you can skip the slide, Aurélien.
I think you're on a co-presenter, you can yourself.
Oh, yes. Oh, amazing. So yes, we're saying that the truth is that it's pretty independent from the V5, except for one specific point. Like in the last meeting we had, we told you that we were building like the V5 and also draft and publish to allow ourselves to build like more advanced collaboration features, such as content story. But here you have like you have a classic content story feature with like your content on the left and then the versions on the right, and you can switch from version to version to do the comparison. And then when you're gonna restore a version, so when you're gonna ask the content to be applied to your current entry, it's gonna be saved as a draft. It's not gonna be published directly. So this is exactly the kind of things that V5 allow us to do. To have a draft version and a published version at the same time. It allows us not to do something a bit bold that would be to publish directly the content that you restored and like override what you have live. So you can like basically restore only what you need, do the modification you need, and only then publish once you are really ready. But yeah, except that there is not so many links with the V5. But there is like something to know about the other feature about internationalization. Like every local will have its own history. It's not going to be one history for all the locals. It's going to be very precise. As I said, in draft and publish, the content will be restored as draft. It's not related to audit log because it's not the same use case. Like audit logs is more to have a list of actions that were performed, and content story is really to see version of the content. And it's different from content versioning. So this is important because there is a possible confusions, but it's not the same as versioning. Content versioning is to have multiple versions at the same time. Like for example, having a version of a page for an event and another version for another event, but it's the same content, the same entry. But content history is really seeing the variation of the content over time. So it's very different. And as I wrote here, the content versioning is a coming feature. It doesn't exist yet. And to conclude, you still know it, but it's gonna be a paid feature, and it's gonna what is gonna change depending on the plan is the number of retention days. And also, as usual, you were part of the design process, kind of, because we had 70 users that went to a prototype. Some of them were from the community. The 19 that discussed with her were most from Enterprise Edition. But yeah, once again, thanks a lot. And that's it for me.
Thank you, Lucas.
And I forgot this. Yeah. Right now, what we imagine is that it's gonna be released on the release candidate of V5. So beginning of Q2 2024. And yeah, this is the slide I forgot. I always forget. And this one is not supposed to be there.
Yeah, we can restart the Q&A. I think we got a few questions from Bobby. Any plans for audit log activity logs that support user and permission? If not, how will the V5 API better enable such a plugin feature to exist?
I think this is more so audit logs for the content API in general, because we don't track actions on that.
Yeah, because often audit logs is related like to people using the dashboard, but of course we could extend it. So far, we didn't get a lot of feedback about this. I would love to. What would be the use case, Bobby?
Yeah, I appear to be in the minority on this, but when we set up our application, our content is a little bit too complicated for at least the existing Strapi dashboard. It's a lot easier for us to just kind of build our own application and kind of handle that internally. So what we did is we basically built a front end to where we use the users and permissions plugin for everything. Pretty much no one is using but the admin dashboard is like for developers only. If we need to go fix something or tweak something or do a quick search or something, we might go in there. But realistically, it's all users and permissions plugin. But because of that, users and permissions plugin is kind of this redheaded stepchild in the Strapi world, where we're not really included in any of the concepts of like updated at or created by, all that kind of stuff, right? That all ends up blank. We've tried to kind of hack our way in there by creating custom fields and some middleware and stuff like that to do that tagging. But at the end of the day, what I'd really love to have is some sort of an audit log or an activity log is really, really the idea for kind of what those users are doing with that API. So it would be like a REST API activity log. User 17 updated this content, similar to how you guys do the audit log in the admin panel, but having that for the REST API would be the use case.
So exposing the audit log API to add your own logs in it would make sense, for example. Could be.
Yeah, because a related thing to that Bogey just asked too is, can plugins add stuff? He mentioned dimensions, but in this case with audit logs too, having plugins be able to easily inject their own actions into the audit log also.
Yeah, that would be great.
Remy?
I just think there are like two phases to it. I think one is about custom events, and that's something we could implement. And actually, we had that in mind initially when building audit logs. We made it easy for us to add that feature in the future. We haven't done it, but it's very possible. The other is just about saving or not the events that were not made in the admin, because in the first alpha of the feature, we were saving like all events, no matter whether they were made in the admin or not. For example, when an entry was updated, it was saved. And then we decided to actually filter those that weren't associated to an author, to a Strapi admin author, because we had a lot of event pollution, like kind of anonymous events that were triggered by like some low-level Strapi stuff. And so we could potentially try to identify whether like an event was made by the unauthenticated, for example, users and permission user. But I'm just saying that those are two separate topics. One is custom events, and one is how we filter events based on whether they have an author or not.
Agreed. Yeah, the fact I'm curious how the audit log as it exists today is even useful for somebody that is implementing users and permissions, simply because of that fact, right? If anybody has update permissions or create or delete or whatever on any of your content types, your audit log is not necessarily the truth, right? Because it's only going to show the last Strapi user that went in there and made a change. It's not necessarily saying, so in an extreme example, let's say somebody puts a bunch of profanity on a collection type or whatever. You're going to go in there and be like, hey, Derek was the last guy that made an update 3 weeks ago, get him. When really it was some users and permissions user or whatever that happen to have update permissions, and we're not logging that at all. So like I said, for anybody that's using the UMP plugin, I'm confused as to how that's even useful.
Yeah, I would say it's because it's not the majority of our enterprise customers who use the user and permission plugin, because they really use Strapi as a CMS. I don't have the exact numbers, but I suspect that not all of them use the user and permission plugin, and so audit logs makes sense for them. But you're completely right. If they use the user and permission system, there will be content or data updates that are not listed in the audit logs.
Even so, if it's in relationship on existing entry, it will show you the entry count, not the IDs of the entries you changed. Was also, to my opinion, a major issue for this.
We don't have audit log tracking of the connect and disconnect.
Yep.
But I can agree here too that if we have a use case where users and permissions is being used, it actually provides a way to bypass the audit logs completely.
But V5 is not gonna bring something new on this. Do we have any other question related to V5, like
I had one with V5 before. Will plugins be allowed to add custom dimensions to like V5?
Basically similar
Per
to what
dimension?
document servers.
I don't think so, no.
what would be the use case, Bram?
The use case could be many things, right? For example, like a sort delete plugin could, for example, also do that. And like there are a lot of plugins that you could make what you want to have an extra layer, right?
He's more or less referring to basically what we're doing with the entity service decorators,
Yeah.
Alex, being able to inject custom capabilities at a deeper level, be able to modify things before they hit the database.
Well, so the document service is that new layer. We'll have a new approach to extending it, which will be a middleware approach. So you can basically put middlewares on functions of the document service. So you can extend the behaviors, but to be able to build your own dimension, I mean, in theory you could, but you would probably just break the entire app, honestly. I don't think that's something to really consider as a possibility, like full-on customization of adding a new dimensions. But yeah, I'm not sure I see the exact use case anyway. So we'd have to see some use case in reality to see what we would have to make extensible or extendable for that to make sense. Yeah, I'm not sure.
All right, thank you.
Christoph also had a question too, just coming back to it since it was related to the presentation. Isn't internationalization a form of content versioning, or he didn't really understand the difference between the two?
Technically, oh, you want to go, Aurélien?
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I mean, like, yeah, it's true that technically it's like another version, but it's like really made for having like the same content, but in two different languages. In our mind, content versioning, it will be more for doing A/B testing, for example, when you need to have a slightly different versions of the same content in the same language. Or for example, if you want to have a V1, V2, V3, but without using the content story. Content story is at the smallest level. Is, for example, it's content story is inside of a local, for example. We have the content story of the German local, the content story of the French one, the English one, etc.
Okay.
Technically, you're right, Christoph. It's very similar, and I think it's in the future that you will see like more differentiation between the two. Is that, for example, on internationalization, we could expect to add some AI to help you translate, and we don't want this feature to be available for content versioning. But for content versioning, maybe it will be more an analytics layer on top of it too. When you are doing A/B testing, we'll see which version of your content has more success for the users.
Okay.
So I think it's mostly about all these additional features. We need to create two different features, but technically it could be, yeah, it can be seen as similar.
I have a
Okay.
question. Can you guys go into a little bit more detail on what the migration process is going to be like? I'm kind of in the same boat as Bobby, where I'm building a very custom backend for a front end. And so I've got a lot of custom controllers and stuff. I know going from 3 to 4 was kind of a pain. In fact, I actually left a legacy project in V3 just because I'm sunsetting that project anyway. So, but yeah, if you can go into a little bit more detail on like what that migration process will be, and specifically like how we can migrate custom controllers.
Sure. So we are building a migration tool. So you will have a CLI to migrate from V4 to V5. It won't be 100% compatible migration based on all the possible customizations. It's just not possible. We already know that some people will have customizations that are unexpected and will have issues. That's also why we need that release candidate, and we want to have people testing the migration very early in the process to see if we can fix things. From a core controller perspective, we are not changing the syntax for core controllers at all. So you won't really have any change to make there. We are trying to minimize as much as possible the code changes. So what will be affected mostly? One is in DB, obviously. Document is something we are introducing, so we need some DB manipulations, but we are gonna try and make them as minimal as possible. So it's mostly adding a new document ID column, basically. And there are like issues we want to address on identifier lengths. We'll try to see if we can fix so limiting the identifier lengths without breaking the databases. That's something we are researching at the moment. So ideally, the DB, like the data migration, should be fairly small. The biggest change from a customization perspective is what Derek just wrote, which is entity service to document service. That's where we are forcing, where there might be the most breaking changes for the people customizing their app. So we really try and make sure we can either find the migration path or documenting the different behaviors that you will need to adapt.
Did we decide on the sanitization stuff, Alex? I know we were talking about it internally.
Oh, that's a good question.
Probably, but I haven't seen that conversation pass by.
Okay.
So.
Yeah, there's an RFC we're still discussing, so don't take this as fact yet. But we're basically, from what I saw in the document, we're also planning on decreasing the verbosity of the controllers so that sanitization will be easier and it will actually be handled within the document service itself, and you'll be able to
That I can
visually.
already share. Yeah, sanitization will be part of the document service.
The one thing that I would like to have in V5 and like I'd be happy to help with this too is just better documentation and best practices of that, of whatever sanitization needs to be done, because the it's kind of like a small article for V4, and there's kind of differing opinions that people have taken from that on the best method. And I think a lot of people like Justin and I that have kind of brought over V3 applications, I for one am a little concerned as to whether or not we're even doing that in the right way. So having that a little more standardized would be fantastic, in V5.
I'll talk to the engineers and see if that RFC is approved, if we can publish it, and I'll send it to you, Bobby, just to have you take a look.
Awesome.
When I looked at it though, it's going to be so much nicer because by default the document service will already sanitize everything, and you'll actually be able to. I think this was a to-do for later on because it won't be breaking. But you'll actually be able to turn off specific sanitization.
Love it.
By default, everything is going to be sanitized.
That's the ideal scenario. Yeah.
Yeah. The remaining part to your question, JPray 2, since you did the V3 to V4 migration, is there's not going to be a set of data migration scripts that you have to run independently. Those are actually going to be automatically ran when the application boots up instead.
Awesome.
Also about the migration, let's say I have like a Strapi for application running with a bunch of custom controllers. Let's say I followed best practices and I only use like entity service in my controllers. Like, would I expect like 100% the migration will succeed, or is it still something you guys are not sure of?
If you didn't, the rule is if you didn't change any code, that will succeed. The main concern for us is the customization, as you can practically change anything you want in Strapi at the moment.
Yeah,
it's practically impossible for us to predict all the different scenarios. So our main, like right now, we are not changing much on like core services, core controllers. All of them are then calling the entity service. That's that piece of code that we know will be the most breaking one from a custom code perspective. We're not changing the query layer almost entirely, even if we have to look at that document ID thing and see if people are doing custom lower level queries, if they will need to pass down that document. But yeah, that's that piece of code right now is the tricky part for us. So we can either maintain the old entity service, so you can still have your custom code working with the old entity service, but we are afraid that it won't guarantee data integrity. So that might work from a code perspective, but that might just like break stuff in the admin unexpectedly. Or we decide to really make a clean breaking change for this one, but only the documentation will be able to tell you exactly what you need to change based on your own use case.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll know more, I think, once we get closer to the RC. And everyone that's participated in these meetings, if you're interested in being a part of the beta process before the RC, let me know. I'll get you added to our beta list so we can send out that information ahead of time.
Cool, thanks.
I would like to be cautious about the time. I think it's the end of the session. Do we have maybe one last question before we wrap up this meeting?
Not
okay.
I'll ask one question to all of you too, and you can send them to me later on Discord. You don't have to answer now. Is there anything of particular interest that you'd like to see in the next session, if any of you end up participating in that?
I'd love to see the resultant database structure.
And I also think if it's all possible at that point to see like how the migration script works, right? Migration
Yeah.
example.
I think at the moment that's only at skeleton, but I'll mention it along and maybe next month because I think we should have that pretty close to being done. We have to ask Marco, I think, Aurelian, but maybe we can do a demo of that. Thank you, everyone.
Good evening, good day.
And
Thanks.
holidays, everyone.
Have a good one.
Yeah, happy end of year.
Bye.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Thanks.